Hi, I'm Keith Garrett, the studio head of Beyond Effects.
So Keith, talk about this program that you're offering. Like for people who don't know it, give us a little elevator pitch about what this apprenticeship and internship is all about.
Yeah, I suppose, but before I can really even hop into that specific description, I need to describe the problem space, which is that real-time visual effects artists are needed across the entire industry. It's the most sought after position from any game developer in the world right now. And there's no clean educational pathway to pursue it as a career. So what we decided to do when we started brainstorming about the best way to get juniors and thriving artists into our studio and frankly into our industry is to challenge ourselves to create a 6-week program, so nice and fast, where inspired artists or recent graduates are able to come into our studio space and work with us, work beside our team on productions, and actually have them build out a project as if they were working for a client or working for an actual game development, structured around the educational content that we're teaching each day.
Now it's interesting because you mentioned like it is hard to learn this stuff. For example, in the VFX space, excuse me.
I'm not the only one.
Yeah, you use programs like Inferno and what's the other one? There's another one.
There's dozens,
Inferno,
if not hundreds.
Yeah.
I mean, Houdini, side effects.
Yeah, Houdini is the other one. Like those are the two big ones, and like there's really no those aren't really user-friendly programs. Those are professional software that's only available in certain situations. And when I was going to college, the only way to even learn those was to get an apprenticeship, get hired by a studio and have someone teach you Houdini, teach you Inferno, because they weren't widely available 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Right.
Can you talk about like the crossover between those two specific programs in game design? Because you are using Maya and ZBrush and Unreal and Unity, but like how much of that crosses over into programs like Houdini and Inferno and other professional software that a lot of students may have never even seen before?
Yeah, sort of the hodgepodge collection of tools in our toolbox is a part of what makes it fun, but like you just said, it's one of the big challenges. So in the film world, the VFX statement or the VFX title, it actually is applied to a really, really broad suite of tools and workflows and career paths. In games, it's used to apply to people that are helping with the simulation work. So basically, I tell my parents, anything that moves in the game that's not a character, a vehicle, or a gun, probably crossed a VFX artist. And what that means is that we tend to have to use a lot of different types of production workflows. Which is, again, it's a huge part of what's fun. Every single task is a new set of challenges, but it does mean that we have to have a really, really wide width of knowledge to be able to bring to the table. The truth is that no VFX artist knows everything. And so what we see are little subspecialties around people's areas of interest. So when it comes to teaching and when it comes to sort of creating junior production artists, what we wanted to do with this apprenticeship is give the base foundation of using the game engine successfully for all the considerations and puzzles and challenges that you need to be a useful production artist, and introduce all of these different subjects and considerations that you can pull with you as potential solutions into every challenge for every task that you're running into. To give you an example, the way that you would approach doing a waterfall versus a magic missile, those are two entirely different challenges. And then you throw in different questions about art styles and what engine you're in, etc. But the core fundamentals are still there in both cases. You need to know how to do particle simulations within a game engine. You need to understand what performance is and what the purpose of the effect is. Is it there for selling and delivering information to the player? Is it there for matching the ambient tone of the game around the player? Or is it there to give feedback? Or frankly, every now and then you get an effect that's just there to be really, really pretty. And each of those requires us to take different considerations in mind in the work that we're doing and to communicate outward to the other developers differently.
Elaborating more on that, is the transition easier for game developers and visual or visual effects artists, or vice versa? Like, is it easier to go one industry into the other, or is there like how much cross contamination is there by learning the tools that you would learn in both industries?
Yeah, it's funny. So because we've all been self-taught, we actually have artists that are working with us from every background. I've got a graphics artist that I'm working with right now that has never really used 3D before, and he's able to do really, really nice traditional illustrations on his effects and apply that. To your question though, the truth is that I think going into the problem space with a better understanding of the challenges of game development is a big one-up. Oftentimes, people that come from film backgrounds, they're used to making perfect pixels. And that's not a luxury that we really have in games, whereas our problem is largely about the fact that the player can interact with it. At a minimum, the camera can rotate, and so we have to make something that feels good from every different angle and works correctly with that jerk player that's just trying to break the game. But more so, we want our work to emphasize the overall design of and intention of the game experience. And so if you're already used to thinking through those problems because you've been around the game development atmosphere and conversations, those considerations tend to come a lot more naturally while you're working on your craft.
Like, where does a student, say you're in high school and you really want to be in visual effects, like where does a student start? Do you just start in After Effects and kind of go from there? Like where does someone get their start in VFX?
We see a huge diversity of answers to that question. I think the most common one that is happening right now, which I'm excited about, frankly, is that there are really good trade schools that are teaching that foundation. So there's, you've got Noman in Hollywood, SCAD in Savannah, and Full Sail in Florida, and on and on and on. There are a bunch of trade schools that are teaching really good blocking foundations of 3D arts. They just don't have the ability, whether it's instructors, time in the curriculum, et cetera, to cover our specific little niche needs for visual effects production in games specifically. And so what we tend to see is a really wide gap from recent graduates that are excited about working in visual effects in games, but don't really know how to approach it. And so then they go out to our community and we have a pretty thriving, helpful mentorship community online, but they struggle on those first steps. And that's where we're trying to use this apprenticeship as a testing ground for us to figure out, one, can we do it in 6 weeks? Because if we can actually take those recent graduates or inspired artists in 6 weeks and convert them into high quality junior production artists, that's something that I'm excited to spread out to schools and other studios around the world so we can get more artists coming into our little industry. But also we get to learn so much about the needed educational content and start figuring out how to provide that online and to other schools, just as resources so that more people can come in and start using our tools and help us grow our craft.
Now, what's the end goal for your program? Will they be hired like at Riot specifically or other video game studios? We help the student or the intern find a job after they're done with the 6 weeks program. Like, what would the end turnaround look like for your program?
Yeah, I certainly can't make any promises, but our absolute goal is to help them land the next step of their dreams. Ideally, we make amazing opportunities for them with Beyond Effects, but if other studios are the right and best next step for them, I would love to see them get out into the world, basically helping other teams. It's great advertising for us, frankly, but it's also just the entire effort here is for us to create educational content that helps people make this jump from that inspired artist or recent graduate status into an actual production art.
Talk about your acceptance into the program. Is it just graduates? Is it people out of high school? Is it talk about what people will have to meet the requirements to get into your apprenticeship program?
Yeah, this first one, we started small. We started really small because we knew that it's going to be a bit of an experiment for us. It's also a paid apprenticeship program. And so we wanted people to come and join us on site working in our studio as part-time employees of Beyond Effects and just sort of tear down all those barriers, embrace them as parts of our team. So we actually set out to only accept 3, and we had such a hard time whittling down our number of applicants. And so we've actually accepted 5 into the program at the moment. The next step from here is for us to figure out how to scale this. And for that, we're sort of allowing ourselves to take a pause on the other side of this and to do a giant retrospective and figure out what are the things that worked? Is it absolutely necessary for people to be on site? Is there a way that we can replicate this? Is there a way that we can give these out as resources to schools, post it online for free, help other studios create other internship opportunities or apprenticeships similar to this? Et cetera. And then ultimately we do want to run a future apprenticeship as well, but we want to make sure that we sort of tear down more of those barriers. Now, to your question about who we were accepting as applicants, there is such a wide funnel going into this program. We've only got 6 weeks. And so we did need people to have a basic foundation of 3D arts, preferably have used Unreal and to know a little bit about what Niagara is in the first place. But the background of our apprentices is actually kind of coming from everywhere. We have a few that are recent graduates. We have a few that are making transitions from other jobs. One from a different game field position, and then one from an entirely different industry trying to get into games and graphic production.
It's very interesting. Like these programs are very helpful just into the business as a whole, because speaking from experience, I lost my job at a place called Digital Jungle back in early 2000s because the colorless refused to train me. He just wouldn't train me because there was an issue of these older veterans of the series, they're 50, 45, whatever, like not wanting to train the younger generation because they'll come in and do it for half the cost. Like, what are your thoughts on that and how that shakes up the ecosystem? It can be in VFX or games in general, being the next generation trying to come in to make their living, but maybe the older generation doesn't want to lose their job to the younger generation.
The lack of visual effects artists has been such a defining factor of our industry for my entire career. It's been phenomenal when I've needed a job because everyone's looking, but it's been really bad once I've had a job because I couldn't get help. And what we see is that there are often, visual effects artists often really, really crunch. We often can't produce the work that we want to because we don't have enough support. And so from my perspective, the more artists we get coming in and using our tools in general, just the more amazing art and craft and stories are going to come out of it. So I'm frankly excited about the opportunity for more artists to hop in. It's also going to allow us to focus more on our craft and become better developers and better artists, as opposed to just needing to fly by the seat of our pants to accomplish a milestone.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up crunch, because everyone knows that, game design, there's a lot of crunch in the game industry, but I think there's even more so in the visual effects entertainment industry. And that's, you brought up like that industry, that specific industry, the VFX artists, they're probably really mistreated and underpaid for what they do, and considering in 2022 how many hours you work on Godzilla's fingernails, you know what I mean, like the things that people work on. Can you speak to that, like, and how the crunch, they're both industries have crunch, but both of them are different types of crunch?
Yeah, and certainly every studio and development team is going to have its own experiences. From my perspective, what happens is you get a team of really passionate people that just want to do their best together, and the production schedule rolls out in waterfall, where we're dependent on people in front of us. And so as every department in front of us does the best that they can, they tend to take a little bit of extra time because they're striving for something. And if you're at the end of that production pipeline, so us and oftentimes lighting, always audio, we're just pressed against the final deadline. And so you end up with a really like a huge bucket of work that you have to accomplish in a very short amount of time. And it ends up sort of, you have to choose, do you want to produce lower quality to cover all of this? Do we have the ability to bring in extra resources? Is there a way to trim down scope or increase the amount of time that you're going to spend on it? And that's kind of, it's a really basic problem to have, but the end result often is that we put in hours because we really care about and are passionate about the work that we're putting out. That said, what I find is that a lot of people are very conscientious of this, and this is a huge topic that I'm seeing the entire games industry embrace in whole right now. And it's a big part of why we started Beyond Effects as a studio, because the games industry has the opportunity to shift into a partnership environment that you see with a lot of other media productions. The film side, it's not necessarily working well, but as you called out, there's other reasons for crunch in film. But games have this great opportunity to be a centralized group that partners with specialists to come in and help cover the needs of a specific chunk of the production pipeline. And so that's where visual effects has this huge opportunity, and that's where Beyond Effects really comes in. And that's why we started the studio, to partner with teams that are inspired and have a vision they're driving for, and simply need visual effects expertise. And so they can bring in a studio like us, and we can sort of help them define their pipeline and navigate it successfully, because we have a lot of experience covering all these different problems. And we also have staff available to help mitigate crunch and help handle the ever-changing amount of resources. And then as soon as we're not needed anymore, we can step away and move on to another cool project.
Can you elaborate more on that a little bit? It's because it is interesting how when you're at school or in a training program, usually they kind of blanket like a subject, they talk about it like very little bit. And then as you get farther in your education or in your training, it kind of gets narrower and narrower in terms of scope, right? Oh, you wanted to do game design, but you're really into lighting now, 4 years later. Can you talk about like how big these teams are that you're working with specifically at your studio? Like, because I think the misunderstanding is people don't understand that it takes hundreds of people to make something, not just 2 people on a computer making, all the effects. It's like you said, it's a pipeline.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a fun and sort of complicated question that comes up all the time when you're trying to figure out how exactly do you structure a team to achieve this gigantic and ambiguous and ever-changing problem, right? And so typically what we see with our engagements is we start early in the pre-production phase where everybody's sort of experimenting and trying to figure out what exactly the scope of the game experience is. And we work with them we kind of call that phase the design validation phase. And so 1 or 2 artists are going to go through and make sure that we have a really clear plan of how the visual effects are going to be utilized in this experience to really sell it, to help emphasize whatever it is that we're building. And our projects range tremendously in presentation and style and everything else, and so it can be everything from super gory and visceral to a really ambient, moody, melodramatic indie experience. And so we have to make sure that our art has a really clear roadmap of how it fits into that experience and make sure that we have all the tools in place. And then from that, we can work with their design team to scope out the whole project and figure out, okay, so if you've got 2 years to develop this, this is the amount of work that we're going to need. And so these are the suggested head counts for the number of artists that you need. This is when we should come in. Or frankly, this is when you should hire somebody internally. And we want to help basically be a partner through that entire process in any way we can. The sizes vary wildly. I mean, we've shipped games with 1 artist because the needs for the visual effects are tiny, and we've shipped games with 18 artists. So it's kind of all over the place.
Now, when you say, like, when someone joins your program over the 6 weeks and say, like, they know, the basics about Maya or Unreal or what have you, like maybe a little bit of effects work, wire removal or something, how do you go about, like, walking them through the different areas of VFX and in game development? Like, are they a rigger? Are they a lighter? Are they a texture? You're like, there's a bunch of different sub jobs within the jobs because artist is so broad, such a broad term.
Yeah. So, and that's where, again, the usage of the phrase visual effects artist for games is a little bit more narrow than what you'd see traditionally in film and CG. And so for us in games, it's typically simulation work, working within the game engine. So there's the giant boatload of work that is your explosions and gunshots and snow and rain and footsteps and blood and magic and spells and destruction, things like that. But it also does tend to involve other things like the flag waving in the wind, the clouds churning as the sky, as the wind blows, and the trees bending as the character walks by and bumps it with their arm. So it's a lot of ambiguous problem solving in this really wide, diverse skill set. Now, to your question of how we go about training it, especially in this apprenticeship program, most of that work revolves around this basic foundational understanding of your simulation tools. So in Unreal, it's a tool called Niagara, where we are breaking down, starting at the very basics in week 1, how to do a complete iteration of creating an effect within the Niagara particle editor, creating materials and textures on it, hooking it up into a level, connecting it to blueprints so that when you press play and run the game, it actually functions the way you want, and then checking it into a server and communicating in our project management tools that we kind of see standardized across the industry. So we want to focus on as many iterations through that process as possible. From there, we actually created our own game project. We made a little 15-minute vertical slice of a first-person narrative experience that we can rip apart for the apprentices and create all of these mock-up environments that we can give them tasks that they would actually see when they're working on their first job. So, hey, this level over here, or this section of the level over here, it's the dock. We need some splashes where the waters are hitting the wall. Or this section over here, it's filled with trash. We need some flies buzzing around, particularly around the lampposts, but can you make sure that they're not blocking the player path over here? We can actually sort of mock up all of these different types of tasks and then coach the apprentices through them. Again, the focus is on building on iteration after iteration. So week 1 is all about that introduction to Unreal, to the full production pipeline. Week 2 is starting to break down ambient effects in the environment, which they're often one of the more simple, but they're the more painterly approach where we sort of bring an environment to life. So it has to match the lighting and composite, integrate correctly into the world, but also be performant. Week 3, we start to dive into your gameplay effects. And so those are going to be muzzle flashes and impacts and destruction effects, things that the player can actually do, where we need to focus on giving the player consequence, positive or negative, for their actions. Week 4 is when we hop into some of the more ambiguous design and information-based effects. So in our game, which we've called Project Artifact, and so in Project Artifact, there's not a lot of heavy-handed spells and healing spells and things like that, but we do have navigational systems that we need to really present to the players so that they know where to go. And so we've got goggles that turn on post processes so you can see what items you can interact with. We have little waypoint markers to show you that you can open this door and pick up these different objects. And then we have other general sort of navigation-based effects. Week 5 is when we hop into cinematics. So Project Artifact has a couple cinematic moments where we really just get to focus on embedding the effects into the motion and shot and composition of the sequence so that it feels good to watch. Those are usually the more fun and sort of freeing. And then week 6 is where we just dive deep into all of the bigger, broader future concepts. There's a lot of slightly more experimental tech that's coming down the pipeline, and we really want everybody to be aware of them, if not to fully understand how to use them, just to know that there are options out there so that when they do run into the word VAT, for example, they understand, oh, that just means vertex animation texture. That's not so scary.
Now, can you talk about what common thread you see specifically with new students or new graduates, or even people who've maybe freelanced game design stuff for a few years, compared to the veterans who've been doing it for 30, 25 years? What are some of the common threads you see in this next generation of VFX artists and game designers?
The coolest thing that we see is we do bring in new students or recent graduates, or frankly new artists, again, from other corners of the industry. Maybe I do have a rigger or a lighting artist that's coming in and hopping into trying to use visual effects tools and pipelines. They bring with them different solutions. And that's one of the coolest things, is that I have the natural way that I think to solve these different problems. And I've got a couple tools that I like using all the time, whether it's Houdini or RealFlow or Maya Fluids or Embergen, Substance, whatever. Artists that come from these different backgrounds, they always bring different tools with them. And because the tools allow them to iterate in different ways, they end up with different artwork and different craft. So what I'm seeing right now, as these trade schools really hone in on being really, really good at your standard 3D productions, so environment modeling, character modeling, etc., we're getting really, really good substance design solutions or simulation work or models. And I'm seeing a little bit less of a focus on animation, timing and principles, and your basic sort of craft focus, where a lot of studios are spending most of their time actually focusing on that. And it's kind of a widening of that gap, actually. I think that a lot of trade schools are becoming really, really good at using tools, but because, as you called out earlier, the knowledge base is so wide, they're not really able to deep dive too much into teaching craft. So one of the other things that we're super excited about, the opportunity that we have with this apprenticeship program, is the chance to bring in guest speakers from around the industry to come in and talk to the apprentices and frankly open up the conversation about visual effects in general from their perspective. So we've got art directors and graphics programmers and production managers coming in to talk to us about what a good visual effects artist is from their perspective. But also we have inspired visual effects mentors and instructors that are producing great educational content online. So one in particular that I'll call out is our dear friend Jason Kaiser, who runs VFX Apprentice, is going to be coming and giving us a 3-part lecture on craft, timing and composition and color theory.
So then my last wrap-up question for you is, what do you look for when people apply for this apprenticeship? Is there anything that someone can do to help them stick out more in the acceptance process? Anything, any advice for future students out there that want to do this apprenticeship program? I don't want to give away all your secrets, but
No, that's a fun one, because again, we're seeing so many different people from so many different backgrounds applying and trying to get into real-time visual effects. What we tend to look for is somebody that's inspired to navigate the puzzles of using our real-time visual effects tools. Every task, like I said, is a new fun challenge and puzzle. And so people that have experience working in Unreal Engine and are able to demonstrate that they can use these ambiguous tools to create some sort of beautiful craft. That's a really, really helpful background for us to see in a portfolio. Usually what we'll do is we'll hop on a call with the candidates that are qualified and inspiring based on the portfolio and their answers, and just ask them, like, what do visual effects mean to you? What are you hoping to get out of this apprenticeship? And there's a passion and a hunger that we hear and see from people that are really driven to get over this hurdle and to really get their hands super dirty on the tools that we're using and just make some amazing visual effects. And you know, whether it's explosions or magic or like I said, clouds churning in the sky, there's just so much fun to be had, and you can kind of feel that infectious energy from a candidate.
And then where can people find more information about this program? And is it every 6 weeks? Is it only in the summer? Is it like when does the program start? And how often does it go for?
We've just launched season 1 of the apprenticeship program. At the moment, this is the only sort of hands-on training like this in the entire industry. And so because it's so new, we're going to pause right on the other side of this, take a breath, and do a big retrospective to learn as much as we can before we figure out the next way to widen our audience. So to learn more about this apprenticeship program and future upcoming apprenticeship programs, please go to beyondeffects.com. Or follow us on any of our social media platforms. We'll be releasing as much content as we can, and specifically having really honest discussions about what we've learned through all this.